The ICU doors slammed shut with a hollow finality. Kira Nolan stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the red sign above the doors as if it were a verdict already decided. Intensive care unit. Inside, machines were beeping. Doctors were moving fast, and her 6-year-old son was fighting for his life. Her knees buckled. Just moments ago, his tiny fingers had been wrapped tightly around her sleeve, his voice barely louder than a breath. "Mom, don't leave." And she had promised him, through tears, through terror, "I'm not going anywhere, baby. I promise." But now the doors were closed, and for the first time in her life, Kira Nolan didn't know if she could keep that promise. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that 3 floors above her, in a private hospital suite, the boy's father was lying in another bed. A billionaire CEO, the man she had loved and left behind, and fate had brought them all to the same hospital on the same night. Before we continue, welcome to Mr. Williams' Story Time, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. If you're new here and you enjoy emotional, powerful stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances, subscribe now and become part of this growing family. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if the one promise you swore to keep was being tested in the most terrifying way imaginable? How far would you go to protect a child you love, even if it meant carrying a secret that could change everything? This is not just a story about illness. It's not just a story about wealth or regret. It's a story about presence, about love that never truly disappears, and about what happens when the truth finally demands to be seen. Stay with me, because what unfolds next will change everything. Kira Nolan had been alone in the hospital room when her son was born. The lights were harsh, the air smelled of antiseptic, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her body as she listened to his first cry echo through the room. But the moment they placed him in her arms, everything else faded. The world became quiet. He was so small, so fragile. His fingers curled instinctively around hers, as if he already understood that she was the only constant he could trust. Tears streamed down Kira's face as she whispered his name for the first time. Terrell. In that moment, something inside her settled. Life hadn't turned out the way she once imagined. There was no partner by her side, no hand to squeeze during the contractions, no one to share the fear or the joy. But as she looked down at her son, Kira made a promise she would carry with her every single day after. No matter how hard life becomes, no matter how lonely this road feels, you will never face this world alone. She pressed her forehead gently to his. "I've got you," she whispered. "Always." And she meant it. The years that followed weren't easy. Kira worked long hours. She learned how to stretch a paycheck. She learned how to be strong when no one was watching. But Terrell grew into a bright, curious boy with a laugh that filled every room and a habit of asking questions that made her smile, even when she was exhausted. "Mom," he would say, climbing into her bed early in the morning, "you're my safe place." Every time he said it, her chest would tighten, because she knew what he didn't. She knew that there was another person in this world connected to him, a man whose name Terrell didn't know, a man whose absence was intentional. Kira never spoke about him, not because she was bitter, not because she was angry, but because she loved Terrell enough to protect his heart from questions that didn't yet have answers. And she loved his father enough to carry the weight alone. The rain started suddenly. One moment the evening was calm. The next, the sky opened up, sending sheets of rain crashing against the windows of Kira's car. Terrell had been laughing in the back seat just an hour earlier, talking about a science project, asking why thunder sounded angry. Then his laughter faded. "Mom, I don't feel good." By the time she pulled over, his skin was burning beneath her touch. His breathing was shallow, his eyes unfocused, fear wrapped tightly around her chest. She called the on-call doctor, her voice shaking as she described his symptoms. The response was immediate. "Get him to the hospital, now." Those words echoed in her mind as she sped through empty streets, windshield wipers fighting against the storm. "Mom," Terrell whispered weakly. "I'm here, baby," Kira said, reaching one hand back to touch him. "Just keep your eyes open for me, okay?" He nodded slightly, but his eyelids fluttered. Her heart pounded harder with every red light she ran. She had never driven so fast in her life. When the hospital entrance finally came into view, she didn't slow down. Tires screeched as she pulled into the emergency lane. "My son, please, he needs help," she cried, throwing open the door. Everything happened at once. Nurses rushed forward. A stretcher appeared. Terrell was lifted gently from the car. His fingers clung to her sleeve as they moved him inside. "Don't leave," he whispered. Kira bent down, pressing her forehead to his. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered through tears. "I promise." The doors closed behind him, and for the first time since becoming a mother, Kira Nolan felt completely powerless. "If you're still with me right now, I want you to do something small but meaningful. Tap the like button if you believe a mother's love is one of the strongest forces on earth. Because what Kira is about to face is only the beginning." The ICU waiting room existed in a world of its own. Time didn't move normally there. Minutes stretched into hours and seconds felt like entire lifetimes. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over plastic chairs that had held the weight of countless prayers, silent tears, and exhausted bodies before hers. Kira Nolan sat alone. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her fingers had gone numb, but she didn't notice. She barely noticed anything anymore. Not the muted television mounted high on the wall, not the soft murmur of nurses passing by, not even the uncomfortable stiffness creeping into her back. All of her attention was locked on the double doors across the room, the ICU doors. Every time they opened, her heart leapt violently in her chest. Every time they closed again without a word, it sank just as hard. She had lost count of how long she'd been sitting there. Her phone lay face down beside her, forgotten. There was no one she wanted to call, no one she could call. For years now, it had been just her and Terrell against the world, and now the world had decided to test them. Kira exhaled shakily and leaned forward, pressing her elbows into her knees. Her eyes burned, dry from crying too much and not enough at the same time. I should have seen it sooner, she thought. The guilt crept in quietly, like it always did, settling deep in her chest where fear already lived. She replayed the last few days in her mind. Terrell had complained about being tired. He hadn't finished his dinner. He'd fallen asleep earlier than usual, curled up on the couch with his favorite blanket. She had brushed it off. Kids get sick, she'd told herself. He'll bounce back. Now he was lying behind those doors, surrounded by machines she didn't understand, watched over by doctors she'd never met, and she couldn't protect him from any of it. Her throat tightened as memories came rushing in, uninvited, relentless. She remembered the first time Terrell got sick as a baby. She had panicked then, too, pacing their tiny apartment at 3 a.m, whispering reassurances to a child too young to understand words but old enough to feel fear. She remembered how small he had felt in her arms that night, just like now. Kira squeezed her eyes shut. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I should have done better." Her voice cracked as she spoke to the empty room, to the doors, to whatever force might be listening. "I promised you," she said quietly. "I promised I'd always keep you safe." A nurse passed by, offering a polite smile, but Kira couldn't bring herself to return it. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted answers. She wanted her son back in her arms. The waiting room clock ticked loudly on the wall. Each second felt like a hammer striking her nerves. She tried to distract herself by focusing on small details, the pattern in the linoleum floor, the soft hum of the vending machine near the corner, the way the chairs were arranged just slightly crooked, as if no one ever bothered to straighten them anymore. But her thoughts always circled back to Terrell, to his laugh, to the way he scrunched his nose when he was thinking hard about something, to the way he always insisted on holding her hand when they crossed the street, even though he was big enough now. "You never know, Mom," he'd say seriously. "Cars are sneaky." The memory made her lips tremble. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth, stifling a sob. "Please let him still be here," she thought. "Please let me hear him laugh again." Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Kira looked up sharply as a doctor approached, clipboard tucked under his arm. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought she might be sick. This was it. She stood so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Yes?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor paused, his expression calm but careful, the kind of expression that never meant anything simple. "Ms. Nolan?" he asked. Yes, that's me," he nodded gently. I wanted to update you on your son." Her breath caught. "He's stable," the doctor said. The word hit her like a wave. Stable. Not better, not out of danger, but stable. Her knees nearly gave out as relief flooded her body so suddenly she had to grab the back of the chair to steady herself. "Can I see him?" she asked immediately. The doctor hesitated just long enough to make her heart flutter again. "For a few minutes," he said. "He's still under observation." "I understand," she said quickly. "I won't stay long. Please." He nodded, motioning toward the doors. "This way." The ICU smelled different from the rest of the hospital. Cleaner, sharper, more sterile. Machines lined the walls, each one humming softly, their screens glowing with numbers Kira tried not to focus on. Terrell lay in the bed, his small body swallowed by white sheets and tangled wires. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. Her heart broke all over again. She approached slowly, afraid to disturb him, as if even her presence might somehow cause harm. "Hey, baby," she whispered, brushing her fingers gently against his hand. His skin was warm but not burning anymore. That alone felt like a miracle. She pulled a chair closer and sat beside him, careful not to disturb the monitors. For a long moment she just watched him breathe. Each breath felt like a gift she didn't deserve to take for granted. "You scared me," she whispered softly. "You scared me so bad." Her voice trembled as she leaned forward, resting her forehead lightly against the edge of the bed. "I need you to be okay," she said. "I need you to come back to me." Tears slid down her cheeks, landing quietly on the sheets. "You're so strong," she murmured. "Just like your father." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her body stiffened. She hadn't said that in years. Kira swallowed hard, glancing instinctively toward the door as if someone might have heard. But the room was quiet. Just her son, and a truth she had buried deep for 6 years. She sat there longer than she realized, holding Terrell's hand, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest. Eventually, a nurse gently reminded her that visiting time was limited. Kira nodded, reluctantly standing. "I'll be right outside," she whispered to Terrell, brushing a kiss against his forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." As she stepped back into the waiting room, exhaustion finally settled into her bones. She lowered herself into the chair again, her body heavy, her mind still racing. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet fear began to take shape, not just fear of losing Terrell, but fear of what might happen if the truth she'd protected for so long was no longer hers to keep. If this part of the story is pulling at your heart, I want to pause for just a moment. Have you ever sat in a place like that, waiting on news that could change everything? If you have, or if this story resonates with you, tap the like button and let me know you're here with me, because the silence Kira is sitting in right now won't last much longer. Edward Muller had always believed that control was the same thing as strength, control over time, control over outcomes, control over emotions. It was the reason he had risen so quickly in a world that rewarded decisiveness and punished hesitation. As CEO of one of the most powerful companies in his industry, Edward was known for his clarity under pressure. Investors trusted him. Boards admired him. Headlines praised him. He had mastered the art of appearing unshakable. Yet now, lying alone in a private hospital room with a heart monitor quietly ticking beside him, Edward felt anything but in control. The ceiling above him was an unfamiliar shade of white, too bright, too sterile. He stared at it without really seeing it, his thoughts drifting far from the present moment. The doctor had used words like exhaustion and warning signs, phrases like "you can't keep pushing like this." Edward had nodded politely, just as he always did. But the truth was harder to ignore in the silence. For the first time in years, his body had forced him to stop, and stopping meant thinking. A soft movement caught his attention. Vanessa sat in the chair near the window, scrolling through her phone with deliberate calm. She was composed as always, elegant even in the neutral-toned waiting attire she'd thrown on in a hurry. She noticed his gaze and looked up. "You're awake," she said gently. "I never really fell asleep," Edward replied. She stood and crossed the room, setting her phone down. "You scared me," she said quietly. "I'm fine." "You say that every time," Vanessa replied, not unkindly. "Even when you're not." Vanessa studied him for a moment, then reached out and adjusted the blanket at the edge of his bed. A small, careful gesture. "You don't always have to push yourself," she said. "You're allowed to rest." The word felt foreign. Edward turned his head slightly, looking away. I have responsibilities. I know, she said, but you're human too. That was the problem. Edward had spent years convincing himself otherwise. When Vanessa left the room briefly to speak with a nurse, Edward closed his eyes. And that was when the memories came. Uninvited, uncontrolled. Kira Nolan. The thought of her always caught him off guard, no matter how much time had passed. He hadn't spoken her name out loud in years, yet it lingered in his mind with quiet persistence. He remembered the way she used to listen when he talked. Really listen, not just wait for her turn to speak. He remembered the way she believed in him before the world ever did. You don't have to prove anything, she'd once told him during one of his long nights at work. You already matter. At the time, he hadn't understood how rare that kind of belief was. Success had changed everything. Meetings replaced moments, ambition replaced presence, and somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that walking away was the right thing to do. She deserved more than the life I could give her back then, he told himself even now. But regret had a way of softening old justifications. Edward shifted slightly, wincing as his chest tightened, not with pain this time, but with something heavier. Loneliness. For all the wealth, the accolades, the influence. The room felt empty. He had a wife, he had a life many envied. Yet lying there, listening to the steady beep of the monitor, Edward realized how little of that success he could actually feel. He had missed dinners, missed birthdays, missed moments that didn't come back, and now his body had finally demanded its due. Vanessa returned quietly. The doctor says they'll keep you overnight, she said. Just to be safe. Edward nodded. Did you want me to stay? She asked. He hesitated. Yes, he said finally. Please. She offered a small smile and sat back down. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't intimate either. It was the silence of two people who cared, yet existed in parallel more than together. Vanessa broke it first. You've been distant lately, she said softly. Edward sighed. I know. Is it work? She asked. And the rest? Edward didn't answer right away. Vanessa didn't press him. She had learned when to wait. Edward glanced toward the window where rain streaked down the glass, mirroring the storm that had brought him here. Sometimes, he said slowly, I wonder what life would have looked like if I had made different choices. Vanessa followed his gaze. We all wonder that, she said. But not all of us are brave enough to admit it, Edward replied. She studied him carefully. Are you regretting something? She asked. Edward thought of Kira's smile, of her quiet strength. I don't know, he said honestly. I just know that success doesn't feel the way I thought it would. Vanessa absorbed his words without reaction. You've given a lot to the world, she said, but you've taken very little for yourself. Edward gave a faint smile. That might be the most accurate thing anyone's ever said about me. As the night deepened, Vanessa eventually dozed off in the chair beside his bed. Edward remained awake. His thoughts wandered again, to roads not taken, to moments he had brushed aside in pursuit of something bigger. He wondered briefly what Kira was doing now, whether she had found peace, whether she had built a life that felt whole. He pushed the thought away. That chapter was closed, or so he believed. What Edward Muller did not know, what he couldn't have known, was that just 3 floors below him, a little boy lay fighting for breath. A boy with his eyes, his features, his blood. A boy whose life would soon force Edward to confront every choice he had ever made. Fate had already begun weaving their stories together again. Edward just hadn't felt the pull yet. If you're still with me, pause for a second. Have you ever reached a point in life where you had everything you thought you wanted, but still felt something was missing? If that question resonates with you, leave a comment below. Your story matters too, because what Edward is about to face will redefine what success truly means. Morning arrived quietly, not gently, but quietly. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind a gray stillness that pressed against the hospital windows, the kind of morning where the world looked paused, as if even time itself was holding its breath. Kira Nolan hadn't slept. She sat hunched in one of the ICU waiting room chairs, her jacket pulled tightly around her shoulders, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Every muscle in her body ached, but exhaustion had nowhere to settle. Fear kept her awake, alert, coiled tight beneath her skin. At some point in the early hours, she realized she was thirsty. Her throat felt dry, raw from crying and whispering prayers into the silence. She glanced toward the vending machines at the end of the hall, then toward the ICU doors again. "Just a minute," she told herself. "I'll be right back." She stood slowly, her legs stiff, and began walking down the corridor. The hallway outside the ICU was quieter than the waiting room. Long polished floors reflecting the overhead lights, the occasional murmur of voices drifting from distant rooms. She walked with her head down, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she barely tasted. She didn't hear the elevator ding. She didn't notice the doors slide open. She turned the corner and stopped cold. Her breath caught so sharply it felt like a physical blow. Standing just a few feet away, near the elevator bank, was a man she knew by heart. Edward Muller. For a split second, her mind rejected what her eyes were seeing. No, she thought, that's not possible. But he was there, taller than she remembered, or maybe she was just smaller now. His hair was neatly styled, though a bit grayer at the temples. He wore a tailored jacket over a simple shirt, his posture straight, even in stillness. He looked older, not weaker, just more real. And then he looked up. Their eyes met. The world narrowed to that moment. 10 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. "Kira?" he said softly, disbelief woven into her name. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "Edward." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Neither of them moved. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly around them, empty and full all at once. Edward started and stopped. "I never imagined seeing you here." Kira swallowed. "Neither did I." He glanced at her face, really looked at her, as if committing every detail to memory. She almost laughed. "I don't feel the same," she thought. "My son's in the ICU," she said quietly. The words changed everything. Edward's expression shifted instantly, concern replacing surprise. "I'm so sorry," he said. "Is he okay?" "He's stable," she replied. "For now," Edward nodded slowly. "That must be terrifying." She met his gaze again, searching for something she couldn't quite name. They stood there, suspended between past and present, neither sure how to step forward. "I'm admitted here too," Edward said finally, gesturing vaguely behind him. "Nothing serious, just a wake-up call." She nodded. "I hope you're okay. I will be." Another pause, another silence heavy with things unsaid. "I didn't know you lived nearby," he said. "I don't," Kira replied. "We moved a few years ago, built a life. If you need anything," he said after a moment, "doctors, specialists, resources, I can help." There it was, the offer, the reminder of who he was now. "I know," she said gently. "Thank you." Their eyes lingered again, longer this time. Something stirred between them, familiar, unsettling, unresolved. Some connections didn't fade with time. Kira was the first to look away. "I should get back," she said. "He's still in ICU." "Of course," Edward replied quickly. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," she said. "Really." She hesitated, then added, "It was good to see you." The words felt strange and true at the same time. Edward nodded. "You too." She turned and walked away, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She didn't look back. Edward stood there long after she disappeared down the hall. He hadn't expected that, hadn't prepared for it. Seeing Kira again, here of all places, had shaken something loose inside him, something he had carefully packed away years ago. She looked tired, stronger somehow, but worn. She's been carrying something, he thought. He pushed the thought aside. It's not my place. And yet, as he returned to his room, his steps felt heavier than before. Back in the ICU waiting room, Kira sank into her chair, her hands trembling. Why here? Why now? Her heart raced as she replayed the encounter over and over again. The way he said her name, the concern in his eyes, the way time seemed to bend around him. She pressed a hand against her chest, steadying her breathing. Focus, she told herself. Terrell comes first. Always. But the past had a way of resurfacing when least expected. Later that afternoon, Edward found himself pacing the hallway outside his room. Vanessa watched him from the chair near the window. "You're restless," she observed. "I ran into someone I used to know," Edward said. "Oh?" she asked, curious but cautious. Yes, he replied. An old chapter. Vanessa nodded slowly. How did that feel? Edward considered the question. Unsettling, he admitted. Like opening a door I thought was locked. Back downstairs, a nurse approached Kira with a clipboard. Miss Nolan? She asked. Yes? We'll be running a few more tests this evening, the nurse said. Just routine, but we may need some additional information. Kira nodded absently. Her thoughts were still elsewhere, unaware that the next question, the simplest question, would change everything. If you're feeling the tension right now, pause with me for a moment. Have you ever run into someone from your past at the exact moment you thought you were finally moving forward? If that moment resonated with you, leave a comment below. You're not alone, because what feels like coincidence is about to reveal itself as something far more intentional. The nurse returned just after sunset. Kira noticed her before she spoke, a calm, efficient woman in pale blue scrubs, holding a tablet close to her chest. She moved with the confidence of someone who had delivered both good news and devastating news countless times before. Ms. Nolan? She said. Kira straightened immediately. Yes, we're going to run a few additional tests on your son tonight, the nurse explained gently. Mostly precautionary. But before we proceed, I need to confirm some information for his chart. Kira nodded, barely listening. Her eyes drifted past the nurse toward the ICU doors as if she could will them to open. Date of birth? The nurse asked. Kira answered automatically. Any known allergies? No. Family medical history? Kira hesitated for half a second, then responded with what she had always said. The nurse tapped the tablet, then paused. And the father's name? The world tilted, not dramatically, not violently, just enough for Kira to feel it shift beneath her feet. She stared at the nurse, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. I'm sorry, she said. The father, the nurse repeated kindly. We need to list it for our records. Kira's mouth went dry. This was the question she had prepared for her entire life, and yet she had never truly believed it would come. 6 years. 6 years of protecting this truth. 6 years of answering every question except this one. She glanced instinctively toward the hallway, toward the elevator, toward the place where she had seen Edward just hours earlier. Her pulse spiked. Edward Muller, she said finally. The nurse's fingers stilled. Her eyes flicked up from the tablet, surprise flashing across her face, just for a moment, but it was enough. I see, the nurse said carefully. Kira's chest tightened. Something in the nurse's tone made the air feel heavier. The nurse cleared her throat. We actually have an Edward Muller admitted here as well. Silence. The words hung between them, fragile and irreversible. Kira's breath left her in a rush. No. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. The nurse tilted her head slightly. Is there a connection? Kira couldn't answer. Her mind raced, scrambling to regain control over something that had just slipped through her fingers. I wasn't aware he was here, the nurse continued, unaware of the storm she had unleashed. But it's hospital policy to ensure accurate records, especially if... That's fine, Kira said quickly, her voice tight. That's all correct, the nurse nodded, satisfied. Thank you. We'll keep you updated. She turned and walked away, and just like that, Kira Nolan's secret was no longer hers alone. She sank back into the chair, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Her heart felt like it was trying to escape her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen, she thought. She had chosen silence for a reason. Edward had been building a life, a future fueled by ambition and responsibility and expectation. She hadn't wanted to be the weight that slowed him down. She hadn't wanted Terrell to ever feel like a complication. I did the right thing, she told herself, but now the truth had found its way into the open, careless and unstoppable. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. What happens when he finds out? 3 floors above her, Edward Muller stood at the window of his private room, staring out at the city lights. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, not physically, something else, something deeper. Vanessa noticed his restlessness. You're pacing again, she said gently. Edward stopped, exhaling slowly. I feel like I'm waiting for something, he admitted. I just don't know what. Sometimes, she said, the things we avoid have a way of finding us anyway. She shrugged. Life usually is. A knock came at the door. Edward turned. A nurse stepped inside, glancing at her tablet. Yes, there's been a minor update in our system, she said. Nothing concerning. Just wanted to confirm. Do you have a son? Edward blinked. A what? The nurse hesitated. A child. We had a name come up in our records. Edward laughed softly, more confused than anything else. No, he said. I don't have any children. The nurse frowned slightly, checking the tablet again. That's strange, she murmured. There may be a clerical error. She apologized and left, but the question lingered. Edward stood very still. A son? The idea struck him with unexpected force. For reasons he couldn't explain, his thoughts went immediately to Kira. Coincidence, he told himself, but the unease didn't fade. Back in the ICU, Kira sat alone with the weight of what she had done, and what she might still have to do. The nurse's words replayed over and over in her mind. We have an Edward Muller admitted here as well. This hospital wasn't just fate brushing past her anymore. It was fate standing directly in her path. She thought of Terrell, of the way he always asked questions, of the way he studied faces so carefully, as if searching for familiarity. You're my safe place, Mom. The memory nearly broke her. She had promised him safety, but safety didn't always mean silence. Later that night, Edward found himself outside the ICU. He hadn't planned it. His feet had simply carried him there. He stood near the entrance, reading the sign, listening to the muted sounds from behind the doors. Intensive care unit. Something pulled at him, something quiet but insistent. Then he saw her. Kira stood near the window, arms crossed tightly, staring into the dark. Their eyes met again. This time there was no confusion, only tension. Edward, she said. Kira, he replied softly. Can we talk? Her heart raced. He gestured toward the chairs nearby. They sat. The space between them felt charged. I was asked something strange tonight, Edward said carefully, by a nurse. Kira's fingers clenched in her lap. So was I, she replied. He studied her face. Do you want to explain? He asked gently. She swallowed. There's something you need to know, she said. His expression shifted, serious now, attentive. She took a deep breath, and in that moment 6 years of silence trembled on the edge of collapse. If you're feeling your heart race right now, pause with me for just a second. Have you ever reached a moment where the truth could no longer stay hidden, no matter how hard you tried to protect everyone involved? If that resonates, leave a comment below. You're not alone in that feeling, because the next chapter is where everything finally comes into the light. The ICU hallway was dimmer at night. Most of the overhead lights had been lowered, replaced by soft wall lamps that cast long shadows across the floor. The usual daytime bustle was gone. In its place was a quiet so deep it felt sacred, like the hospital itself understood the weight of the moments unfolding inside it. Edward Muller stood just outside the ICU doors, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He hadn't realized how fast his heart was beating until he forced himself to slow his breathing. Across from him, Kira Nolan stood with her arms folded tightly against her chest, as if holding herself together by sheer will alone. Her face was calm on the surface, but her eyes told a different story, one filled with fear, exhaustion, and a resolve that had taken years to build. You said there's something I need to know, Edward said quietly. His voice echoed slightly in the empty hallway. Kira nodded but didn't speak right away. She glanced toward the ICU doors, then back at him. He's sleeping, she said. You can see him, but I need to tell you first. Edward followed her gaze. Something in her tone unsettled him. All right, he said. I'm listening. She took a breath, slow, deliberate. For a moment, Edward thought she might change her mind. My son's name is Terrell, she said. Edward nodded. You mentioned him earlier. He's 6, another nod. And he's everything to me, Kira continued. He always has been. Edward watched her carefully now, sensing where this was going before his mind was ready to accept it. Kira's voice dropped slightly. There's a reason the nurse asked me about his father, she said. Edward swallowed. Yes, he said. She asked me too. Silence stretched between them. Then Kira looked him directly in the eyes. He's yours, she said. The words landed without sound, just stillness. Edward stared at her. For a heartbeat, his mind rejected the idea entirely. searched for another meaning, another explanation. "What?" he said softly. "Terrell," she repeated. "He's your son." The hallway seemed to narrow. Edward felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, like the world had tilted just enough to throw him off balance. "That's not possible," he said automatically. Kira didn't flinch. "It is," she replied. He shook his head slowly, his thoughts scrambling. "You would have told me," he said. "You would have said something." "I wanted to," she said, "but I didn't." Edward's breath came shallow now. "Why?" he asked. Kira looked away, toward the ICU doors, where her son lay sleeping. "You were building a life," she said quietly. "Everything was happening so fast for you, your career, your responsibilities, your future." She turned back to him. "I didn't want to become something you felt trapped by." Edward stared at her, stunned. "I would have chosen him," he said without hesitation. "I would have chosen you." She met his gaze again, tears glistening but not falling. "And what if you hadn't?" she asked softly. "What if you resented him? Or me? What if every hard moment felt like something you lost instead of something you gained?" Edward opened his mouth and closed it again. He had no answer for that. "I loved you enough," Kira continued, "to carry it alone." The words cut deeper than anger ever could. Edward ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps away before stopping. He had a son. 6 years of first steps, first words, first memories, all lived without him. "Can I see him?" Edward asked finally, his voice unsteady. Kira hesitated, then nodded. She stepped aside and pushed the ICU door open slowly. Edward followed her inside. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines. Terrell lay in the bed, his small body surrounded by white sheets and thin wires. His dark lashes rested against his cheeks, his chest rising and falling steadily. Edward froze. The resemblance hit him instantly. The shape of the boy's face, the curve of his nose, even the way his brow furrowed slightly in sleep. Edward felt something inside him break open. He stepped closer, his movements careful, almost reverent. That's him," he whispered. Kira nodded. He reached out slowly, hesitating just above Terrell's hand. "May I?" he asked. Kira nodded again. Edward's fingers closed gently around his son's. The contact sent a shock through him, warmth, connection, something primal and undeniable. "I missed everything," Edward said quietly. "Yes," Kira said. "You did." He looked up at her then, pain etched into his face. "And you never asked me for anything." She shook her head. "I didn't need anything from you. I needed stability for him." Edward nodded slowly. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, "but I want to learn." Kira studied him carefully. "This isn't about money," she said, "or fixing the past." "I know," Edward replied. "It's about showing up." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That's all I ever wanted," she said. They stood together in silence for a long moment. No titles, no history, just two parents standing beside their child. Edward finally broke the silence. "I'm here now," he said, "and I'm not leaving." Kira closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of those words settle. "I believe you," she said, and for the first time in 6 years the future didn't feel quite so heavy. "If this chapter stirred something in you, take a moment. Do you believe it's ever too late to step into the life you were meant to live? If that question resonates, leave a comment below, because the story doesn't end with truth revealed. Sometimes that's where healing begins. Night settled gently over the hospital, the kind of night that didn't rush, didn't demand, just existed. The ICU hallway had grown even quieter, the few remaining staff moving with hushed steps, their voices low and respectful. Outside Terrell's room, Kira and Edward sat side by side in 2 simple chairs, separated by only a few inches of space and a lifetime of unspoken history. No one spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The steady rhythm of Terrell's breathing drifted through the slightly open door, grounding them both in the same fragile relief. He was still here, still fighting, still theirs. Edward leaned back slightly, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "You always hated hospitals," he said quietly. Kira smiled faintly. "I still do. You used to say they smelled like fear," he added. "And disinfectant," she replied. "Don't forget that part." A soft chuckle escaped him before he could stop it. I'd forgotten how observant you are, he said. You never noticed until I pointed things out, she replied. He nodded. That sounds like me. They shared a small, knowing silence. The past hovered between them, not as a burden but as a presence, not demanding acknowledgement, just waiting to be remembered honestly. Edward glanced toward Terrell's room. He looks peaceful, he said. For now, Kira replied. That's enough. Edward nodded. He hesitated, then spoke again. You did a good job, he said. With him. Kira looked at him surprised. You don't have to say that. I know, Edward said. I want to. She studied his face, searching for anything that felt performative, defensive, or driven by guilt. She found none. Thank you, she said quietly. The words meant more than either of them acknowledged. Minutes passed, then more. The hospital clock ticked softly above them, marking time they had once lost and were now cautiously reclaiming. You used to fall asleep on my shoulder, Edward said suddenly. Kira glanced at him. I did not. You did, he insisted. Every time we took the late train back from the city. That was because you talked too much, she said. About work. I was passionate, he replied. You were exhausting, he smiled. Fair. Her smile lingered longer than she expected. Edward's voice softened. I noticed, he said. Noticed what? When you fell asleep, he said. I pretended I didn't, but I noticed every time. She looked away, her gaze settling on the floor. I didn't know that. I know, Edward said. There are a lot of things you didn't know. There was no accusation in his voice, just honesty. Their fingers rested close together on the armrests, so close that the space between them felt charged. Once that closeness would have been effortless, automatic. Now it required awareness, care. Edward shifted slightly, his hand brushing against hers. Neither of them moved away. The contact was brief, but grounding. Kira inhaled slowly. They sat like that for a long time, not as lovers, not as strangers, as two people rediscovering how to share space without fear. Edward spoke again, his voice quieter now. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, or trust, or anything. Kira turned to face him. That's good, she said, because those things can't be expected. He nodded. But, she continued, they can be built. Edward met her gaze. I'm willing, he said. She searched his face again, this time not for regret, but for resolve. I believe that, she said. He's doing well, she said softly. You can both rest a little. Kira shook her head. I'll stay. Edward stood. I'll grab you some water. She hesitated. You don't have to. I want to, he said. He returned a few minutes later with 2 cups. Kira rested her elbows on her knees, exhaustion finally pulling at her shoulders. Edward noticed. You don't always have to be strong, he said gently. She exhaled. I've had to be, she replied. I know, he said. But you don't have to be alone anymore. The words settled slowly. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned back slightly and, without thinking, rested her head against his shoulder. The motion was subtle, almost accidental. Edward stilled. He didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly, just stayed. Kira closed her eyes. For the first time in days, her body softened. Just a little. Some connections didn't break when tested. They bent, they waited, they endured. If this chapter felt quiet but powerful, let me ask you something. Do you believe that sometimes the strongest kind of love is the one that waits patiently, without demanding anything in return? If that resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Because what comes next will test not just love, but character. Vanessa Muller learned the truth in the quietest way possible. No shouting, no confrontation, no scene. Just a sentence spoken carefully by a nurse who assumed she already knew. I believe your husband is meeting his son downstairs, the nurse said politely, adjusting the chart in her hands. The child in ICU. Vanessa paused. I'm sorry, she said. The nurse blinked. Oh, perhaps I'm mistaken, but the damage was already done. Vanessa smiled faintly, thanked her, and walked away with the same composed stride she always used. Only when she reached the empty family lounge did she sit down. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and stared at the wall. A son. The word echoed, heavy and unreal. Edward had never mentioned a child, Not once. Her first instinct wasn't anger. It was shock. She replayed the nurse's words again, slowly, carefully. That meant this wasn't a rumor. This wasn't speculation. This was real. She had always known Edward carried something unspoken. He was present, attentive, kind, but guarded, as if part of him existed in a place she couldn't quite reach. She had accepted that. Some people came with locked rooms. What she hadn't expected was what was inside one of them. After a few minutes, she stood. Her heels echoed softly against the floor as she made her way toward the ICU. She didn't rush. She didn't stall. She simply walked, steady, deliberate, calm. Edward was sitting beside Kira when Vanessa found them. He looked up first. The moment their eyes met, he knew. "Vanessa," he said quietly. Kira stiffened slightly, then stood. "I can step away," Kira began. "No," Vanessa said gently. "Please don't." She looked at Kira then, not with hostility, not with judgment, but with curiosity and something else that surprised even her. Understanding. "So," Vanessa said softly, turning back to Edward, "it's true." Edward stood slowly. "Yes," he said. "It is." Vanessa took a breath. "How long have you known?" Edward didn't hesitate. "Since tonight," she nodded. "And the child?" "He's 6. Another nod. Her chest tightened, not with jealousy, but with the weight of reality. Vanessa exhaled. Then she said something no one expected. "He deserves his father." The words landed gently, but firmly. Edward stared at her. Kira did too. "I didn't say it would be easy," Vanessa continued, "or painless. I said it's right." Edward's voice cracked. "Vanessa," she raised a hand, "let me finish." She turned fully toward him now. "You've spent your life doing what was expected of you," she said. "Building, leading, providing." She gestured toward the ICU room. "But this," she said quietly, "this is different." Edward swallowed hard. She paused. "And neither did I ask to be blindsided. But here we are." Kira shifted uncomfortably. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she said. Vanessa looked at her. "I believe you," she replied. "I really do." That surprised Kira most of all. Vanessa returned her gaze to Edward. "This isn't about me winning or losing," she said. "It's about a child needing his father." And Vanessa straightened her shoulders. "Whatever happens next," she said, "you choose him." Edward felt something inside him settle. "Yes," he said, "I will." Later that night, Edward sat alone in his room. The weight of the day pressed down on him, but for the first time, it didn't feel suffocating. He thought about everything Vanessa had said, about grace that didn't demand repayment, about love that knew when to step aside without bitterness. He realized something then, something that reshaped his understanding of success entirely. Power could build empires, but character built legacies. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. "I'm not walking away," he whispered, to no one and everyone at once. Vanessa packed quietly. She didn't rush. She didn't cry. She left a note on the desk. "Be present. That's the only thing that matters now." She paused at the door, took one last look around the room, then walked out with her dignity intact. Downstairs, Kira sat beside Terrell, watching him sleep. Edward entered quietly. "She knows," he said. Kira nodded. "I figured. She showed more grace than I deserved," he said. "Then don't waste it," she replied. Edward nodded slowly. "I won't." He pulled a chair closer to the bed, and for the first time in his life he stayed, not because he had to, but because he chose to. If this chapter moved you, pause for a moment. Do you believe true strength sometimes looks like stepping aside with grace instead of holding on with force? If that resonates, share your thoughts in the comments, because what comes next is where healing finally begins. Morning light filtered softly through the ICU window. It wasn't bright or triumphant, just pale and steady, like the world offering a quiet reassurance that night had passed. Kira stirred in the chair beside Terrell's bed, her body stiff from hours of half-sleep and worry. Her fingers were still wrapped gently around his hand, just as they had been through the night. She felt it before she saw it, a faint movement. Her breath caught. "Terrell?" she whispered. His eyelids fluttered. Then they opened. "Mom?" he murmured, his voice thin but unmistakably there. Kira gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "I'm here," she said quickly, leaning forward. "I'm right here." Terrell blinked, adjusting to the light, to the machines, to the unfamiliar quiet. "Yes," she said softly, "but that's okay. Your body needed it." He nodded faintly, then frowned. "My head feels funny." "I know," Kira said, brushing his hair back gently. "But you're safe now." The door opened quietly behind them. Edward stepped inside. He had been awake for hours, afraid to leave, afraid to miss this exact moment. Kira looked up at him, eyes shining. "He's awake," she whispered. Edward swallowed hard. He approached the bed slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might make this moment disappear. Terrell turned his head slightly, studying the stranger with sleepy curiosity. "You look like me," he said simply. The words landed with unexpected weight. Edward smiled, a real smile, unguarded and trembling. "I was thinking the same thing," he replied. Terrell looked between them. "Mom?" Kira took a breath. "This is Edward," she said gently. He's someone very important." Edward lowered himself into the chair beside the bed. "I'm your dad," he said softly, "if it's okay for me to say that." Terrell considered this for a long moment. Then he reached out. Edward froze, then carefully placed his hand into his son's. Terrell's fingers curled around his. "Okay," Terrell said. It was that simple. Kira turned away, overwhelmed. Edward's chest tightened as something inside him finally settled into place. The doctors came in soon after. They spoke of improvement, of recovery, of cautious optimism. Kira listened, nodding, absorbing every word. Edward stood beside her, present, not speaking unless asked, not disappearing when things felt uncertain. After the room cleared again, Terrell drifted back to sleep, his breathing even and calm. Kira exhaled deeply, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "You should rest," Edward said quietly. "So should you," she replied. He nodded. "I will. Right here." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she said. He met her gaze. "For letting me in," he replied. The hallway felt different now. "I don't expect things to be easy," Kira said quietly. "I wouldn't want them to be," Edward replied. "Easy doesn't last. He comes first," she said. "Always," Edward answered without hesitation. Kira searched his face. Back inside the room, Terrell stirred again, mumbling something unintelligible. Edward leaned forward instinctively. "I'm here," he said softly. Terrell smiled in his sleep. And in that small, quiet moment, surrounded by machines, fear, and uncertainty, a family began to take shape. Not perfectly, not traditionally, but honestly. Healing didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with presence, and for the first time that felt like enough. If this chapter brought warmth to your heart, pause for a moment. Do you believe healing often begins not when everything is fixed, but when we stop facing life alone? If that resonates, share your thoughts in the comments. Life didn't return to normal overnight. It never does. Terrell stayed in the hospital for several more days, each one bringing small improvements that felt monumental to Kira. A stronger appetite, a brighter look in his eyes, a laugh that returned softly at first, then with more confidence. Edward was there for all of it, not hovering, not controlling, just present. He learned the rhythm of Terrell's care the same way Kira once had, by listening, by watching, by showing up even when he didn't know what to do next. Sometimes he brought books and read aloud in a steady voice. Sometimes he sat quietly, letting Terrell sleep with his hand wrapped around his finger. Sometimes he and Kira shared coffee in the hallway, speaking about ordinary things that felt extraordinary simply because they were shared. No one rushed the future. No one named anything too soon. They allowed healing to move at its own pace. On the morning Terrell was cleared to go home, sunlight streamed through the hospital windows in long, hopeful lines. "Does this mean I can have pancakes?" Terrell asked seriously. Kira laughed through tears. "It means you can have all the pancakes you want." Edward smiled. "I know a place." Terrell looked between them. "Both of you?" Kira and Edward exchanged a glance. "Yes," Kira said. "Both of us." Vanessa sent a message later that day. No explanations, no bitterness, just a few words. "I hope he's okay. Take care of him." Edward read it quietly, then set his phone down. Grace didn't always come wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it arrived as space, and he honored it. Weeks passed, then months. Life rearranged itself, not dramatically, not perfectly, but honestly. Edward learned how to be a father without trying to be a hero. Kira learned that strength didn't disappear when shared. Terrell learned that love could grow without replacing anything that came before it. One evening, as Terrell slept peacefully between them on the couch, Kira watched Edward tuck the blanket carefully around him. "You kept your promise," Edward said softly. Kira looked at him. "Which one?" "You said you'd never let him face the world alone." She smiled. "I didn't," she said. "But neither did you. Some people believe life reunites us by accident, but the truth is quieter and more meaningful. Life brings people back together when the time finally demands honesty, when presence matters more than pride, when love is no longer about possession, but about responsibility. This story reminds us, love doesn't disappear, it waits. Truth may be delayed, but it always arrives. And real success isn't measured by power, wealth, or titles. It's measured by who stays, especially when staying is hard. If this story moved you, don't rush away. Like the video so this story can reach someone who needs it. Share it if you believe stories can heal. And subscribe to Mr. Williams Storytime, where we tell stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Because sometimes the hardest moments lead us back to the family we were always meant to be.